Hey everybody, Joe here from the Lions Led by Donkeys podcast. If you enjoy what we do here on the show and you think it's worth your hard-earned money, you can support the show via Patreon. Just a $1 donation gets you access to bonus episodes, our Discord, and regular episodes before everybody else. If you donate at an elevated level, you get even more bonus content. A digital copy of my book, The Hooligans of Kandahar, and a sticker from our Teespring store. Our show will always be ad-free and is totally supporter-driven. We use that money to pay our bills, buy research materials that make this show possible, and support charities like the Kurdish Red Crescent, the Flint Water Fund, and the Halo Trust. Consider joining the Legion of the Old Crow today. And now back to the show.
The Navy has a fine sense of tradition. Whenever an American vessel leaves port, the crew sings this ancient sea chanty. A one, a two, a three, a four.
Hello, and welcome to yet another episode of the Lions Led by Donkeys podcast. I'm Joe, and with me today from an undisclosed location near the grassy knoll is Nick.
We're still doing this?
Sure. The grassy knoll is eternal.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is, I can't do a Jesse Ventura.
Oh yeah, I gotta hear his voice, and then I can get pretty close to it. I know I can.
I'm not a comedian, and I'm definitely not an impersonator.
Oh no, God no. But I know I could do a pretty good one.
And Nick, I don't know why I'm talking about Jesse Ventura, because they were talking about Nazis, and that's not a good segue at all.
Oh.
So what do you know about? Also, like, forgive any fuck ups that I say more than normal, because my eyes are currently dilated.
Yes.
And your close vision is completely dog shit when your eyes are dilated, and the laptop screen is burning my retinas.
I think there's a term for close vision.
I don't know. Nearsightedness?
I say close vision.
Up close eye stuff.
Yeah.
Nick, you're a World War II guy. You're a resident World War II guy.
Yeah, I dabble.
What do you know about life in a fucking U-boat?
Not a thing. Is that what we're
talking about? Life
about?
in a U-boat in World War II. I do have to point out there's U-boats in World War I too. But like,
what I can say is it was a sweaty life. It was a BO life.
Very much so, and probably more than.
I have seen Hunt for Red October.
Have you ever seen Das Boot?
I want to see it, but I don't know. It's been recommended to me by reenactors, and that just turns me off.
It is a really good movie.
Really?
And it's also a very good book, written by an actual U-boat veteran, which are super rare, and we'll talk about why that's the case.
Do they hate themselves?
No. It's like, honestly, it's hard to. It's like, I don't know, probably like being 1815, and you run into like a veteran of Napoleon's invasion of Russia. Like, holy shit, some of you made it.
You
kind of like that. Yeah, like we assumed that all of you were dead.
Yeah.
And so it's bad. In case you're running short on time or whatever, and you're running into work while listening to this podcast, too long, didn't read. Life in a U-boat is real bad. And,
have a good day at work.
Yeah, have a good day at work. Tell me what that's like being gainfully employed. Now, life aboard a submarine still kind of sucks from what I've understood, which is why like the U.S. Navy suckers people into like 6-year-long contracts, because they really only get you for one, and they have to be really long. But we're going to be talking about various different U-boats during World War II. And instead of talking about all of the different makes and models or whatever, because there's a few, I'm going to talk in generalities. I'm not a submarine nerd, like, at all. And pointing out the differences in all the different subs honestly doesn't change the quality of life for most of these people. Like, most of the changes had nothing to do with crew life quality whatsoever. It was almost like, now it can carry more torpedoes, or like now it can go even further underwater. Yes, it actually just burns sailors for fuel now, but like we can go underwater for hours at a time. But it was almost universally, though. So it does seem like life in a Allied sub, like an American sub, in World War II was better, but not a whole lot. It was almost
Right.
universally bad. And I'm talking quality of life on board without people shooting at you or trying to blow you up with depth charges or whatever. Like the American subs seem to have a bigger refrigeration system. They actually had a functioning kitchen with a cook on board, which is impressive in comparison to the U-boats, which did not. Yeah, there was cooking on board, but it was like it was like a hot plate situation. And we'll talk a little bit more why that quickly didn't matter. So obviously life aboard these U-boats was horribly, horribly cramped. A normal sub was only about 311-ish feet long. And I should point out that the vast majority of this fucking thing
were in this?
Is not meant for people. It's all machinery to keep the U-boat from not killing you while you're underwater. Which we'll talk a little bit more about that because it depends mostly on like what exactly they're doing, but we'll get there. Now it's weird because they're called U-boats, like underwater boat, rather than submarine. Because this is gonna sound kind of weird here, but it was pretty much a surface ship that could stay underwater for a little while. I know that probably sounds really fucking brain dead for me to say because it's a submarine. A submarine is a boat that goes underwater. But that's actually not really the case. It's like an important differentiator, which honestly, when I read that at first,
I had to reread that sentence.
I thought it sounded very dumb.
That sentence. Like, what?
Because I'm like, yeah, of course it's a boat that goes underwater. That's like saying a plane is a car that flies. Yeah. Like a 737 is just a commuter train that flies. Like that makes a lot of sense when you like rip a bong or whatever. So the main reason why I have to kind of point that out is that most people think of like a modern submarine that can stay underwater for a very, very, very long time. But World War II subs, especially U-boats, stayed on the surface pretty much 90% of the time. All their combat patrols were carried out on the surface. And submerging underwater was literally only for like an ambush attack or when you're running for your life.
So it's working.
You never stayed underwater for that long if you could help it. There's a reason for that. I believe they just call those Soviet submarines. And it's because they're still on the bottom of the ocean. Nailed it. That one's been underwater since 1986. Keep it up, boys. There's a reason why they didn't stay underwater that long, and that's mostly a technological thing. These things were powered by a diesel engine while it was surfaced. And while it was surfaced, the diesel engine would recharge a lead acid battery, like a lot of them, like is a whole array of batteries that would then be switched over to power them while they're underwater, thus draining the battery. So you could only stay below the surface as long as batteries could keep the sub alive. This could be around 24 hours or 80 nautical miles, whichever came first, barring any horrible mechanical problems, which there were so many of those, Nick. Just so many awful mechanical problems.
Yeah, I've seen movies where there's bidding out of pipes and people are just closing faucets. And I'm sitting there like, why?
Okay, so keep that in mind later on. Why having seawater inside a submarine, other than the fact that, okay, now we're going to sink and we can't control it. There's actually a lot of other things of why that's bad. And we'll talk about that later. Yes, seawater inside your boat, bad. Like I always say, this podcast covers the hard topics. So something bad would really, really happen if, say, that seawater that's rushing in through pipes or whatever came in contact with those batteries that were keeping you alive while you're underwater.
Right.
Lead acid batteries combined with seawater creates chlorine gas.
Oh. They're fucking gassing themselves.
Yeah. I mean, if anything, if anybody's ever hit the Nazis with an Uno reverse card, that's it.
Yeah.
Locking them in an enclosed tube and then gassing them. Like, fucking the Poseidon is like, got you good, fucker.
Yeah.
Like, also, that was a huge problem even when it was above the surface because, leaks happen and whatnot. But yeah, if water got in the battery compartment, they were absolutely fucked. Which will become important later on, because we're going to go over what honestly is probably the dumbest sinking in U-boat history, and that's going to be an important part of it. Now, these things are 311 feet-ish long.
I hope a dude was just like carrying a glass of water and tripped.
I'm going to need you to think dumber. Also, you don't drink seawater. You'll die.
No, just like a regular glass of water.
Oh, so the salt is an important part of why it doesn't work. Anyway,
Maybe he wanted some salt in it. Who knows?
I have a sore tooth, and I need to gargle this salt water right next to these batteries.
Yeah.
Now, for like this tube being full of machinery with batteries that could possibly fire chlorine gas at you and being fueled by diesel fuel, like you assume there's like, I don't know, some like decent speed, right? Like these things can get up and move. Like how fast do you see these things going?
Let's see. 10 miles per hour.
You're close. 8 miles an hour while submerged.
That's not bad.
That's like World War I tank speed right there.
That's faster than I can go underwater.
It's not faster than Michael Phelps can go underwater. So take that, U-boats.
Michael Phelps.
American ingenuity. The 7-foot tall freak of nature that runs on Doritos and weed smoke. Now, just for a little comparison, I do this mostly for myself because I don't know anything about submarines. A modern nuclear-powered sub, and there's a listener who continually complains about how I say the word nuclear.
How do you say it?
I'm not going to fix it now. Nuclear.
What's wrong with that?
Whereas I don't know. As Homer Simpson says, nuclear. It's pronounced nuclear.
I don't see the issue.
I don't know. So I was curious about how these World War II era subs compared to modern day subs. So a modern day nuclear sub can stay underwater for months, with the longest underwater patrol going for 111 days by a British submarine in the 1980s, which sounds like fucking hell on earth. Yeah. Yeah, you're just stuck in a metal tube full of people you definitely hate by this point. I can only compare being in a sub as like, I don't know, being moist tankers. Like, cause like I was in a tank, so after maybe a week, you're already over everybody's shit. You're over them completely. I can't imagine after 111 days of being locked inside together, there's gonna be a murder.
I just can't imagine like, oh, let me go take a shower and then walking back out and like, oh, cool, I just got fucking steamy, all fucking moist again.
I will say that's better than the other option. That we'll talk about right now. So let's say you got drafted by Nazi Germany and you ended up in the Kriegsmarine, but had the shit luck of being in a submarine. What kind of life would you expect? To make a long story short, incredibly long stretches of boredom punctuated by moments of hoping depth charges don't murder you and the steel tube you now call home. Also, everything smelled terrible all the time. just constantly. As we're talking about the U-boat specifically in this episode, we're going to be talking about the German experience. So unfortunately, we have to put ourselves in the shoes of a Nazi. Okay, so you got drafted. Submarines are obviously technical machines, and one wrong move can lead to you and everybody in the sub dying a horrible death. Being, explosively decompressed so quickly your blood literally boils in your veins. So you'd probably think that the training to get, to understand how to use these fucking things would be intense, and only the best sailors become submariners, right?
No.
Yeah, you're right. If anybody thought that was the case, you must be new to the show, otherwise we wouldn't be talking about this. So U-boat officers were just Navy officers that went through the same training as everybody else. And if chosen for U-boat duties, they would undergo a rigorous 207-hour-long course to learn how to be an officer on a submarine.
I feel like that's not enough time.
207 hours. So by comparison, a hairdresser needs 1,500 hours of school before they can be licensed in some states. Your submarine commander has less training than a hairdresser. Also, so do cops.
Nice.
As the war went on, that training would be decreased as needed.
What if you had a Kriegsmarine captain hairdresser on the submarine?
Everybody's just getting shitty Nazi undercuts.
Not him. He knows what he likes.
I'm going to say he's going to get an emo pixie cut. And it's going to be like, he's going to have frosted tips. I feel like Nazis would have frosted tips.
Oh, for sure.
But this 207-hour-long rigorous course would be cut shorter and shorter as the war went on, and it became more and more important to replace all the dead people. And if you...
Here's your handbook. There's your submarine. Good luck.
Here's the keys to the sub.
Yeah.
Pull it around front.
Yeah.
But I don't know how to drive manual. Yeah, it's the stick shift sub. I don't know anything about subs.
Yeah, is there an automatic sub and a manual sub?
I assumed it's all like the Flintstones, and there's just ports at the bottom of it with like sailors kicking. Yeah. So let's say you were an officer, and let's be honest, nobody in here is going to be an officer. So you're enlisted. You can look.
Ouch.
You can look forward to between 4 and 20 days of training.
On what? What am I training?
It was depending.
All right, don't suck in the battery fucking gas. I feel like there's not really much.
Torpedoes go out, not in. Remember that. Actually, funny side note. That was a problem for American subs.
What?
Yeah, they came out with a magnetic torpedo or something like that, and one time they fired it and it zipped back around and blew themselves up, which is just some Wile E. Coyote ass shit.
That's fucking awesome.
So how long your training was depending on what exactly your job was aboard the sub. There's technicians. Right. That was their job, was to like actually do mechanic technician type stuff to keep the sub going. They'd undergo the longest amount of training, which, mind you, is still only 20 days. Like the guy who's like working on your diesel engine that will or will not murder you if it's worked on wrong. Solid 2.5 weeks training.
Nice.
And then there were seamen. Their job was to do like shitty, unskilled labor jobs, like Houston watch, man decked guns, manually loaded torpedoes, plus other like shitty manual labor positions like cleaning, like stocking food and cooking. Because
sucked on the captain's toes.
If he was into that sort of thing. Like they didn't have a specific cook, so it was also the seaman's job to like cook, and like if it was their job to fire deck guns, stuff like that. Okay, so neither you nor your commander really knows what you're doing or what a submarine is. That sucks. So we're going to talk about your new life a bit. The size of the crew that you'd be working with was dependent on the kind of sub you were on. It could be anywhere from 20 to 50 people in the largest U-boat.
What?
And the amount of space you had to work with when it came to living and working on board the sub was universally cramped. It did not matter what boat you were in. Even though the biggest U-boat was the size of a Boeing 767, it was packed with machinery that kept it functioning and floating and not killing you, leaving little room for the people inside of it. It's like that Robot Chicken episode where it has Transformers. Yeah. And there's people. There's no room for people as they like transform and crush everybody.
That's honestly, yeah, for sure. There's no fucking way somebody's going to survive inside a transformer when it transforms.
No, you're just being turned into like Optimus Prime grease.
Not good grease.
No, because like it has bones in it. Like
yeah,
I got a Nike caught in my gear.
Yeah.
So the bunks that you would be living in were squeezed.
Shia LaBeouf just caught in your gears.
Honestly, that's the best thing that could happen to him. Him and Megan Fox just get churned into jelly.
Oh.
The bunks that you were living on were squeezed into wherever they could fit. This included along the engine and torpedoes. But don't worry, you won't be spending a lot of time in those bunks anyway. You'd be working around the clock in 4 to 6 hour shifts if you were a technician, or 8 if you were a seaman. That downtime wasn't set aside for sleep either. There's other chores that you had to do other than your set duty job. So like, cooking, cleaning, bitch work, effectively. You had to do those when you weren't doing your actual job. And that was a continuous cycle. So 8 hours on, 8 hours off, 8 hours on, 8 hours off. Forever.
Forever. Yeah, the U-boat's still at the bottom of the sea. They're still working.
And there wasn't enough bunks to go around because of how small the insides were. So it didn't matter how many people were awake or asleep. There wasn't enough bunks anyway. The only private bunk belonged to the captain, which was separated by everybody else by a sheet. This meant everybody else slept out in a hot bunk situation. Are you familiar with hot bunking?
I don't think I want to know.
It sounds gross. It's like hot couch guy. So hot bunking is the practice of you share bunks with a rotating cast of people, all of whom, and you as well, are absolutely chock full of lice and other skin disorders because that happened all the time. And there's almost no way to treat any kind of medical problem if you caught one while you're on patrol. So the bunk that you're sleeping on, almost as soon as it's your turn to get up and go to work, the guy coming off work is crashing into it right after you. It's like sitting on a hot toilet seat.
Oh, okay.
Someone was just here.
Sometimes that's the best toilet seat when you're out in the field. When it's cold.
As long as you don't think about it too much.
Yeah, all you got to do is be like, hey, it's warm.
Yeah. So how long would some of these patrols last? How long would you be cycling forever, climbing into a lice-infested bunk that you shared with 3 other people? So assuming nothing bad happened and you died, you could be at sea for 6 months.
Ugh.
During that time, I hope you don't enjoy showering because you wouldn't be doing any of that.
Don't need it.
So space, as we talked about already, was at a premium. Fresh water, it turns out, takes up a ton of space. And that same space could be used for something that could prolong the patrol, say like diesel fuel, allowing the sub to stay out for a much longer amount of time. As the Nazis' main goal, during the Battle of the Atlantic, was to hunt, destroy shipping, and strangle supplies going towards Europe, and at one point the UK, the longer the patrol was, the better. So that meant that almost every patrol switched out half of their drinking water with diesel fuel. This meant fresh water was strictly rationed to be for drinking only. And even then, it was very limited to the point that everybody was pretty much always slightly dehydrated.
I would hope for my U-boat to get hit by a fucking depth charge.
This is the part where I get to say, wait, it gets worse. Also, I'd be hoping for death about 3 days into this journey.
Yeah.
The subs were not climate controlled whatsoever. And you can imagine how much water you would want to drink in a hot metal tube full of churning machinery and people.
Especially when you're hot bunking.
The air was a mixture of hydraulic fluid, diesel fumes,
Ugh.
shit, piss, and body odor.
Oh, fuck.
And you've swam in the ocean, right?
Yeah.
So you know how your skin feels awful afterward, like it's super dry and like bugs you if you don't shower off all the salt.
No.
Well, it dries your skin out really bad and can cause rashes. Especially for prolonged exposure. So you can't bathe in seawater. It fucks your skin up. So the Germans gave out this weird soap that you could apply that would try to get the salt off of your body, so you could then bathe in seawater. The problem was this soap kind of covered you in a weird oily film.
Ew.
Just slippery as fuck all the time, which is very dangerous when you're walking around in a metal tube full of functioning machinery and diesel power and stuff. You could slip and die. Also, it was flammable.
I was just about to say, what if it just so happens that you slick oiled skin is all of a sudden flammable? But guess what? It fucking is.
How could we make this worse? Yes, let's make it catch on fire.
And then so you're just looking at the fucking soap and you're just all in awe, and they're just but it smells good.
It was unscented.
Oh, that's even worse.
Yeah.
They could at least try to make it smell good.
So like, so sailors would just choose not to bathe because like bathing in seawater and then using that soap literally turned them into the Human Torch, or just
could
like
you imagine it getting just engulfed in flames underwater
and killing everyone around you at that very moment. It's like fires aboard ships are like a horrible threat, which is why like everybody in the Navy on a boat is certified as a firefighter because they're a very, very big threat. Now, also, you're on fire and underwater. And like, I'm just like picturing all of these guys like that scene from Always Sunny where Frank becomes a germaphobe and covers himself in hand sanitizer.
Oh yeah,
and it's just like writhing around in a pile of it. Yeah, so like people just chose like, fuck it, I'll just stink. So like I was saying is the air was like putrid, it was foul. It was also the tubes because you're submerged in water and you have hydraulic fluid, people are sweating, so it was super humid as well and hot.
Right.
If you know anything, you know about food sanitation and what happens when things are hot and humid, right?
Yeah.
Everything slowly but surely gets covered in mold and mildew.
God.
So, thank you for your service on the moldy shit tube. Like one of the jobs that you'd have every day is like cleaning mold off of everything.
Oh.
And like
that reminds me of my barracks room from our
and like. So like one of your jobs would be cleaning mold off everything, and the walls of the sub would sweat.
Don't you just hate that?
And like the thing is, like when you think about it even more, of like what could this sweat be coming from? It's literally from you, because like one of the things filling the air with humidity is your own sweat, right? So like you're literally mopping your own reconstituted BO off the walls.
Could you imagine like one day you wake up and you realize your recording room is sweating?
Yeah, like if I was locked in this room, which by the way, I have so much more room than a Submariner, and the walls were just pulsating in my own shit juices, I would hang myself with my laptop cable.
And then a dude in the corner is like, "You want a hot bunk later?"
Just switching up bunks for no reason.
Yeah.
Okay, so like we've been in situations where we couldn't shower for a very long amount of time, right? Like what's the longest you've been in the field and not been able to shower?
I usually find a way. First time,
you wipe yourself off or whatever.
Yeah, I'd make a makeshift shower, but I wouldn't consider it a shower, so I'd say like 3-4 weeks.
Yeah, and like I should point out that like baby wiping it is significantly more than what these guys are doing. And I think the furthest I went was 2 months. But I was like cleaning myself in one way with fresh water every day.
Right, little bird baths.
Yeah, and you could still change your uniform, which like, changing your socks and your underwear and like your pants, like hell yeah, I'm good to go, right? Like these guys,
have you ever like cleaned yourself and then you feel lighter?
Oh God,
you feel agile?
Yeah, like I'm ready to take on the world. I smell like
how heavy were they?
All accounts from the surviving U-boat crewmen, which there's not many, like makes it sound like at the end of every patrol, like they would literally scare away people when they came out because reasons we'll talk about. One of the things about rationing fresh water means nobody's shaving for 6 months at a time. And I don't know if you've ever had, say, a thick beard and it's really hot and humid, but I can tell you from firsthand experience, it only makes you sweat more.
Right.
And makes you feel disgusting because it feels like you can't get your face clean. So like we said, like you feel really good after changing a uniform. These guys did not have a change of uniform.
Oh.
Gear and clothes take up space. So every sailor was only allowed to bring the clothes on their backs, along with a change of socks and underwear.
Oh. In 3 months, I'll change my underwear. Can't wait.
Got to turn it inside out. The one luxury on board, because even Nazi Germany realized they stuffed all these poor people into a moldy shit tube, was an incredibly strong deodorant that was used to cover body odor throughout the entire trip.
Was it Axe?
That's exactly what I thought of. It's like shitty high schoolers just spraying everything down with Axe. But like, okay, I'm showing my age a little bit here, but you remember a long time ago when Axe body body spray commercials.
Oh yeah,
came
you
out.
got to do the X.
Yeah, you'd spray, and then like women
But
would come out of nowhere.
It's one continuous
and, like,
X. You don't stop.
you spray forever until the can's empty. But you remember when like they would spray, and then women would come out because like it was attractive or whatever the stupid commercials worked. Just now imagine those same commercials, but you just like spray the X on you, and like a crowd of pale, unwashed Nazis with lice just come shambling out of the world like, yes.
We're going to hot bunk later.
Axe, but for Nazis with skin disorders.
It just looks like a fucking zombie movie.
It's like the other guys when all the homeless dudes fucking the Prius.
Thanks for the fuck shack.
We will fuck in your car again, sir.
Oh, you have a Prius.
I do, and
You might
I
have
have to
that
say,
problem.
I have solidarity with homeless people, and I allow them to have sex in my car as much as they want. That's called praxis.
Isn't that called a? What did they say in the movie? It's like a soup. Oh man,
it's a soup kitchen.
We're having a soup kitchen.
I think no, I don't know if it's a soup kitchen. Maybe it was. I don't remember. So obviously having a bunch of people crammed into a hot metal tube that smells like shit and is covered in mold and sweating your own reconstituted sweat is bad. But what happens when you get a bunch of people breathing in an enclosed, airtight space, Nick? Off the top of your head, what do you think could happen?
Well, I imagine carbon dioxide.
Yeah.
I imagine that'd be an issue.
Eventually, it's a big one.
They would need Apollo 13's crew.
We have to put it together, a Fanta can and that pile of mold on the wall.
That's the filter.
And then we're going to plug it into Gunther's asshole. So eventually the crew would breathe in all the oxygen, which would then be replaced by CO2 as you breathe out. In case anybody was aware, that's how your respiratory system works. You're welcome. So normally you start losing your shit when your CO2 levels are around 2.5% in the air that you breathe. You start getting a little loopy, and then slowly, you move downwards until you die. After about 5 hours submerged in a U-boat, the CO2 levels inside would be already getting close to 2%. This is what is known as not good.
The mold starts talking to you.
The mold starts just growing down your throat. One of us. Like, have you ever watched Fern Gully?
No.
So there's like a sentient glob of oil that is like one of the bad guys. It's just like slithering around and talking about how great pollution is. I just assume that's what the mold is like.
Ugh.
But remember, they can technically stay underwater for a day or longer. So if they had to, like in the case of emergency, so they had an emergency alkaline air purification charge that like they could fire that would clear the air using alkaline to neutralize the CO2, as well as 10 bottles of emergency oxygen as a last resort. These bottles are meant as if a, quote, if we don't use these, we will die scenario, as one person put it.
Oh, yes.
So what actually happened a lot of the time is U-boat crews were high as fuck from their own CO2 as they tried to run for their lives. Hilariously enough, one of the best ways U-boat crews could tell that their air was running low in oxygen and high in CO2 was because they would have a hard time lighting their cigarettes.
That's how.
Notice how they were still smoking as they were underwater and burning through oxygen. Yeah, oxygen would be so depleted from their environment that matches wouldn't work, which is incredible. But apparently matches worked better than lighters.
I feel like they probably shouldn't be smoking down there.
Yeah, that's what I would say too. If you're in an enclosed space, breathing in recycled oxygen, maybe don't smoke in it. So this all sounds really bad, right? So
sounds fucking awful.
Nick, you're a resident cook expert here. How do you think they're eating?
Well, from all the mold.
Not great, right?
Because I remember exactly what my dad used to say whenever I used to find mold on something. He'd be like, "It's extra protein." Oh, thanks, Dad.
Yeah, that's just poor people.
It really
I grew up with
is.
that too. Just cut it out. You'll be fine.
Yeah.
So at first, when the crew was like underway, They would stuff as much fresh food as they could on board to live off of for the first few weeks of their patrols. But remember how I pointed out that there was no refrigeration?
Yeah.
Yeah. That part's going to become key.
That sounds stupid. Let's put fresh produce on this tube of bullshit.
And remember how I said that, like, you're sleeping literally everywhere? Right. What kind of horrible foodborne illnesses? I'm literally asking you because I have no idea. What kind of horrible foodborne illnesses could be spread? Say if you just like slept next to a raw hawk of ham for weeks at a time, because there's literally pictures of this happening.
I mean, fuck.
Just raw, unrefrigerated meat and like dairy and vegetables. I don't think they had a lot of fruit, but like you know what I'm saying. Like it's just out.
I know there's like 3 of them that I know I can't pronounce, but they start with C. And I know they're
all
bad.
of them will probably kill you in more colorful ways.
E. coli. I know that one.
I got pork eye.
Yeah. I know there's like listeria and all that other bullshit.
So what you're saying is I shouldn't hot bunk next to a slab of beef.
No, I wouldn't fuck. I imagine now, fuck, do you think they were sleeping on their food? They're like, hey, we don't have space.
Sleep on top of that side of meat. Someone just spooning alongside the cabbage. Yeah. So there's a reason why that they would stuff food aboard for the first few weeks of the patrol. And not much past that. They had to eat it first and as fast as they could due to their living conditions. The air was full of diesel vapors as well as being gross and humid. And there was only one very small refrigeration unit. This meant that any fresh food was immediately spoiled within a couple days.
Why don't they just pack like fucking Top Ramen?
It wasn't invented yet.
Yeah.
The Nazis make a time machine and only jump back for cup of noodles.
Yeah, they go straight back to hell.
Anything beyond a couple weeks at most, the fuel and fluid vapors in the air would turn it into literal poison. The bread would sprout mushrooms on it, which should be noted is not normal. No. If you've never seen moldy bread before, it's not normally seeded by mushrooms.
Look, our sandwich is growing. Our bread is growing into a sandwich.
In a couple weeks, it'll be pastrami. Yeah. So early in the war, U-boat packing lists for the first few weeks had things like fresh meat, bread, eggs, fruit, vegetables, etc. And that's where I found the picture of like just huge cuts of meat, like out of the Flintstones, dangling from meat hooks between where men were sleeping. Obviously, that's hilariously unsafe, and some of it is propaganda, but some of it is also true. But by the end of the war, as you know, the realities of material shortage crept up on Nazis, those packing lists shrank considerably. So you're probably asking, well, that's the first couple weeks. But you said that these went on for 6 months. What happens then? Well, you were fucked. You'd have to survive on canned food. Pretty much just sausages.
Ugh.
Just 6 months of various different flavors of Vienna sausages all day, every day.
I would take the labels off the canned, and it'd be a surprise every day.
What is it? It's sausages.
Yeah, again.
Fuck. Though the Kriegsmarine knew that their sailors couldn't survive on canned food alone. You'll be nutritional deficiencies and everything will creep up on you or whatever. So they issued a flavorless soy filler product called Bratling Spulver to round out their diet. Now, it was flavorless, but it had vitamins and minerals in it. So, you can get scurvy or some shit. But the crews called it diesel food because while originally tasteless, after being exposed to the rancid air, it would just taste like diesel fuel.
It reminds me of what they fed the people at the back of the train in Snowpiercer.
Yes, yeah, it's the jelly. Yeah. But, honestly, I'd rather eat bugs, to be completely honest.
I mean, that might taste better.
At least it would have a taste.
It's true.
And not like fuel.
And then Bear Grylls is sitting next to you like, oh, this is great.
Bear Grylls is peeing on top of it. That's how you get the flavor. Yeah. So, all of this combined with what else? But extreme psychosis. Eating out of cans and weird globs of diesel engine combined with being locked in a tube with 50 dudes huffing each other's horrible shit gas did not equal good mental health. People began snapping after weeks or months of rarely seeing outside, and violently attacking one another were very common. Still, other people would just stare aimlessly at the wall for hours, lost in thought, or completely snapped and gone.
Hey, Mold. Me again.
Dear Mold, I write you and you still ain't calling. Some commanders organized chess matches to try to like make people focus on something that wasn't horrible depression.
Imagine being the guy that loses all the time, though.
Yeah, and eventually the Nazis installed like a record player on the boat. But like you can only imagine how many records you could bring. It's like the same 3 records for 6 fucking months. What do you guys want to listen to? I have Baby by Justin Bieber, WAP by Cardi B, and Rocket Man by Elton John. Fuck.
Play the same song.
I brought Nickelback's Greatest Hits volumes 1 through 3. And that's when the suicides are skyrocket. Actually, speaking of which, suicides were apparently not common at all.
Really? Morale was high.
I couldn't find a single... I don't know. I don't think so, but like... I couldn't find a single written report of a Nazi U-boat crewman killing themselves. So, with all this, your most basic needs as a human are being met in the most nightmarish way possible. What happens if you say, you have to take a shit? I mean, you've been eating a ton of canned food, breathing in diesel fumes constantly, probably equals some weird, like, lower intestinal problems, right?
I'd imagine.
So there's 2 toilets on most U-boats. Unfortunately, one of those toilets was always used to store supplies.
What?
Yeah, so like until all the supplies were used in that toilet, you couldn't use it.
Here's our problem. We put an extra toilet on here.
Better turn it into a closet, which, to be fair, sounds like something any military would do because they hate you. So that meant everybody only had 1 toilet to work with. But you can still shit, right? Kind of. U-boats had functional toilets, but only at certain times. They were pressed for space and did not want to store any waste on subs. In comparison, the U.S. subs had a completely internal waste collection system. So, like, take a dump, flush it, it would be sucked into, like, a storage container to be emptied out later.
Where some dude would be waiting.
And it was absolutely some poor bastard's job to fucking, like, get the wipey out that clogs the toilet or whatever. The Germans didn't want to build a container system for that because, remember, they're already using half their water supply for diesel fuel. And instead they came out with like a way to fire it into the ocean. But this is the 1940s, so things didn't work out great. It was a manual operated pump that the shitter would have to use after shitting. The shitty? I'm not sure. So you'd poop and you have to pump it. You'd slowly pump the contents of the toilet into the ocean. But because this is manual, it only works at low pressures, meaning it could only be used when you're at or near the surface. If the crew was submerged, it couldn't
fucked.
And wouldn't be used, meaning everybody had to just shit into a pile. But more, what normally happened is emergencies or diseases aside, people just wouldn't use the bathroom. Then that's mostly because when you were underwater, that deep, you were running for your life or ambushing, really not the time to try to fucking cut a turd off. So, like, hold it. Now,
it's like the back of the fucking bus where the shitter is. Everybody knows, don't shit back there, but I still do.
Yeah, I've done it. I've 100% done it.
Yeah.
As the war dragged on and allied technology to hunt these subs got better, German subs spent more and more time underwater trying to stay hidden or running for their lives.
All they had to do was follow the shit trail.
Well, that's the problem. That meant more and more people couldn't take a shit because they were in high-pressure waters, so their pump system wouldn't work.
Exactly. Undetectable.
That was the Allies' plan. If we keep them underwater, the Nazis will just burst because they'll never be able to take a dump. Enter the Type 7C submarine. And a toilet so high-tech in this age of submarine warfare, it literally required a specially trained toilet technician in order to operate it correctly.
Imagine that, MOS.
It was the Rube Goldberg project of taking a shit. So it had like, what did I get picked for? Am I a tank crewman? Am I in a battleship? Am I in a submarine? You're the toilet guy. Fuck. God damn it. Toilet guy. I'm toilet technician 3rd class. Nice to meet you.
You know how the Navy has different insignia on their ranks, where you got the prop. this
fucking
one's
toilet.
Yeah.
It's just the guy popping a squat, taking a shit.
Yeah.
So this new system directed human waste through a series of chambers into a pressurized airlock. The contraption would then blast it into the sea with compressed air, sort of like a shit torpedo.
Did they use it in combat?
But this meant that it could be fired, the shit torpedo that is, while deep underwater. A specialist on each submarine would receive training on proper toilet operating procedures. Because the reason for this was there was a exact order of opening and closing the valves to ensure that the system flowed in the correct direction. Because the Germans either didn't think about or did not care enough because there was no safety mechanism in place in case if you did this incorrectly. Meaning if you did it wrong, the toilet would flush it in reverse and flood the submarine with water and shit.
So this guy has to flush it every time?
Yes.
Imagine if he's fucking dead asleep and you try to fucking take a shit.
That's exactly, you'd have to wake him up.
I would hate that fucking job. You got all these dudes that need to take a shit after eating Vienna sausages the past week.
And this brings us to the case of U-1206.
The shittiest of them all.
The time that a guy who did not use the toilet technician killed a couple people while taking a shit.
Oh, fuck. So it is the shittiest of them all.
Yeah, the U-1206 is one of these super shitter subs. After undergoing trials, it was given over to the command of 27-year-old Adolf Karl Schlitt. That's right. His last name is Schlitt.
Schlitt.
And he killed some people with his shit. I'm not proud of that rhyme. Now, its first combat patrols on April of 1945, damn near the end of the war. Schlitt and his submarine were 8 days into their first combat patrol of the war. And the submarine lurked 200
Morale
feet...
was high.
Morale and contents of his bowels were high. The submarine lurked 200 feet beneath the surface of the North Sea when Commander Schlitt decided he had to take a dump. Looking around, he saw the boat's resident toilet specialist was busy on one of his other jobs. But apparently this particular dump could not wait. So he decided he could, fuck it, I'll figure out the toilet myself. Schlitt took his dump and attempted to get the toilet to work, but couldn't. So he called over an engineer, the engine mechanic, who was not the toilet specialist.
Not the toilet mechanic.
Yeah, to help him. With the two of them fucking with this piece of machinery at the same time, they succeeded in doing exactly what they should not have done and sent gallons of highly pressurized shit water in the wrong direction and shooting back into the submarine. They then panicked and attempted to fix this. Only then did Schlitt decide it was a good time to go maybe find that toilet guy the Navy gave him. But by then, it was way too late. Seawater was flooding in through the toilet and began pooling into the engine room, submerging the batteries.
Oh.
This caused them to create chlorine gas mixed with shit, locking the Nazis in enclosed space and gassing them. They call that ironic justice. Now, Schlitt was faced with two options: stay submerged and die, either from drowning or choking on chlorine gas, or immediately surface to try to get some fresh air. He did what any other human would do in this situation, ordered the sub to surface. The crew blew the ballast tanks, which helps the submarine rapidly surface, and even fired their torpedoes in an attempt to improve the flooded vessel's buoyancy so they could surface more rapidly. What happened next is chronicled in Schlitt's own report on the incident. Quote, "At this point in time, the British planes and patrols discovered us." Like, imagine Schlitt's like, man, I've already fucked up my first command. This couldn't possibly get worse. And in the background, you just hear God Save the Queen. Yeah. Fuck. The planes immediately turned and began firing on the submarine. And they weren't prepared to defend themselves in any way because, remember, their lungs were just rapidly melting from chlorine gas exposure, and they were trying to not die rather than man the guns. Schlitt attempted to escape, but quickly sustained so much damage that became impossible. And because of his shit mishap, they could no longer submerge because of all the chlorine gas. Faced with capture or death, Schlitt ordered his sub to be sank and the sailors aboard on board their life rafts to surrender themselves to the British forces. Now, normally it's custom for sailors to turn around and provide food and water to enemy sailors as they attempt to pick them up. But as the U-1206 was harassed by planes and not ships, it would take a while for a boat to show up and grab them. As the crew floated around, they were battered by heavy seas, and at one point, one of the rafts overturned off the coast of Scotland, killing 3 people.
Fuck.
Eventually, the sailors were picked up by a British ship, and Schlitt survived captivity and lived on until 2009. But he will forever be known as the U-boat captain who killed more people with a shit than a torpedo. His own bid. He killed 3 people by taking a shit. What's probably more interesting is I know I've been calling them interchangeably Nazis and Germans throughout this point. Is that the U-boat branch of the Kriegsmarine, according to the book Iron Coffins, were the least politicized branch of the German military. A good reason for that is everyone involved in the operation knew how likely they were to die, so fervent loyalty to Hitler really didn't matter all that much. In the beginning, political officers were a common thing aboard these U-boats, but as the war went on and their casualty rates quite literally skyrocketed, they stopped doing that. They're like, look, I'm all about this Nazi stuff, but I am not going on that U-boat.
Yeah, I'm not about that underwater life. Did you hear about Schlitt's boat?
I don't feel like dying because that guy needs to take a dump. Now, obviously, it was common for officers and men to be part of the Nazi party, but that didn't really matter when you realized that you had to be a member of the Nazi party to do virtually anything in German society at the time, to include just going to college. With the political officers gone, naval officers really didn't care about enforcing political rules because they had a fucking job to do. Open criticism of the war and even Hitler was commonplace and went unpunished, something that would quite literally get you shot almost anywhere else. And their officers were operating under the idea that it doesn't really fucking matter. Why does it not fucking matter? Because U-boats were literally so dangerous that nobody cared. The Nazis just kind of put their hands up and said, you know what? This one's all you. Now, I've brought up how dangerous these boats were quite a few times, so we should probably look at the raw numbers and just see how dangerous they were. And that's actually a very good reason as to why there's not many first-hand accounts of U-boat crews. An average crewman had a life expectancy of 60 days.
Oh.
Now, if you think about it, it is very rare for a crew member of a submarine to die individually. Normally, your whole crew dies. So that meant most crews had the life expectancy of 60 days. Surviving your first full 6-month patrol was considered incredibly rare.
And you get to go home after that, right?
No.
Oh.
Absolutely not. And most of the boats sent out, all the boats sent out, 70% would never return.
Fuck.
70% casualty rate.
That is awful.
By the end of the war, out of the 40,000 or so U-boat crewmen who had served, less than 10,000 survived. This meant that being a U-boat crewman was the single most dangerous job in all of World War II, regardless of what side you were on.
Yeah.
And there's like very, very few first-hand accounts. Like Das Boot is a good one, as is Iron Coffins. But like, there's not a whole lot out there.
I don't know why I just imagine them all getting issued parachutes before they got in their U-boat.
I need you to explain that one a bit.
I don't know. I just had this weird thing. Like, here you go. Here's your parachute. For what? You know.
It's so when you wrap it around yourself, your corpse might float back to the surface.
Easy retrieval.
Now, I don't know about you, Nick, but for me, as someone who's not a World War II scholar, but more floats around the periphery as a nerd, you don't hear much about the Kriegsmarine.
No.
And when you do, it's like the Wolf Pack. You know, they had these Wolf Pack attacks. They strangled continental Europe of supplies. They're an integral part of the Battle of Britain to try to strangle off the British Isles. But honestly, I think a serious argument can be made that the Kriegsmarine was the most useless branch of the German military in World War II. And I think a lot of these casualties that's just how war goes. Like when you start losing, your casualties will increase. But most of it is the Kriegsmarine had very little regard for their own sailors. Everyone in Germany by the late stage of the war, especially in 1945, like when our poor boy Schlitt killed his sub with an epic dump, knew the war was lost. And that went doubly so for the crews of the U-boats. Remember, their job was to strangle off supplies, but that didn't really matter anymore when the enemy was literally inside of Germany. Their mission was pointless.
There's no way you're sitting in that U-boat with shit up to your ankle thinking you're going to win the war.
No, not at all. And the thing is, like, you could think, like, we could use these literal thousands of people in better ways. Like, sending them out. Like, I understand by this point, they're literally holding onto, like, Berlin by their guts or whatever. But nothing is to be gained by sending out a submission at this point. But they were doing it all the way until the end of the war. Like, there was subs that surrendered in the Atlantic Ocean because they were still out shooting, they're sinking transport vessels. It's insane. Completely pointless. Not only was their mission pointless, but it was fucking suicidal. The German codes had been cracked a long time before, and Allied ships had new sonar and radar technology that made U-boats a little more than death traps. And hunting and killing them became like shooting men trapped inside of a U-boat. And that is where like Karl Donitz comes in, the commander of the Kriegsmarine during the war, and eventually the only other ruler of Nazi Germany other than Hitler himself. Because remember, after Hitler killed himself, Karl Donitz was appointed the new chancellor of Nazi Germany in the north before he surrendered as well. But he kept sending out men on missions, fully knowing that they were probably all going to die and their mission was impossible. But history remembers Donitz as like pretty much like Guderian or a few others as like one of the good commanders. You know, he wasn't a Nazi. He was just a good military commander. One that's patently ridiculous. He literally was the commander in chief of Germany for a couple weeks. But it's also just not true. He's literally a war criminal that spent 10 years in prison after the war. Also, his U-boat reputation is almost entirely built on early successes in the war. Now, if you remember early on in the war, like when the U.S. was like the arsenal of democracy, we're going to send freedom ships or they call them liberty ships. And like one of their tactics is like, we will just outnumber the U-boats. And they were unprotected, unescorted supply ships. So like the U-boats had a fucking field day. And one of the most dangerous jobs to have in the American military during the war was to be a merchant marine, because you were just getting your shit hammered in by U-boats constantly. But this eventually changed when these Liberty ships were escorted. And almost as soon as that happened, U-boats were pointless. Like the whole vaunted Wolfpack tactic is pretty much blitzkrieg in that it's empty war propaganda that people fell for and still talk about. But as soon as reality was confronted and the Kriegsmarine learned that we're now fighting navies capable of fighting back, they became the worst branch of the entire German military, and a military full of branches that got their asses kicked.
Yeah.
They only excelled at attacking unarmed, unescorted, and unsuspecting cargo ships. And the Kriegsmarine as a whole never really registered a victory against the Allies in a peer-on-peer conflict, which is impressive when it comes to literally the navy of a world power. Like, can you think of any triumphant German military victories of the Navy in World War II? There's a reason for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the same goes for World War I. Like, they built a navy, then didn't really want to use it because they realized that the British Navy was much more powerful, and they would just get their fucking teeth kicked in. Which is kind of hilarious because they're right across the channel.
Let's just not show up to game day.
Yeah, I'm taking my battleship and going home. So, Nick, how do you feel now about your service in a U-boat?
It sounds fucking awful.
You wouldn't pick it?
I would totally be the toilet engineer, though. That would be my job. Guaranteed.
What do you think the ASVAB score is for the guy who's the toilet technician?
Spell your name.
How do you feel about pooping in toilets? I feel pretty good about it, actually. You're hired.
Oh, I see you spelled your name wrong. So go ahead and go on to the toilet technician school.
How do you feel about being a cook?
Yeah. I like food. That'll work.
So, Nick, we do a thing on this show called Questions from the Legion. And I literally don't know of a better question that could be asked for an episode quite like this, which is, what do you think is the worst job in military history?
Oh, well, don't you say. We were just talking about one.
Yeah, U-boat fucking registered. U-boats definitely, submariners in general, definitely one of the worst in World War II. It's hard to measure anything against it because I can't think of any other job where 70% of you are going to die.
Yeah, I can't think of any right now.
Kamikazes, I guess, but that's kind of the point.
Yeah, that's in the job title.
Imagine being a kamikaze and still only having a 70% success rate.
Yeah. Or the one guy that just keeps coming back, I don't know, it just doesn't work out.
There was that one guy that kept coming back, and they eventually just shot him.
Yeah.
That's real bad. Maybe a medic from I don't know, the 1800s, because your job is awful, but most of that terribleness is impressed on someone else because you're sawing their limbs off. There's ghosts in your blood.
You have too much blood in your body, turns out.
Yeah. Your whole body lousy with poltergeists and lead. The humors are all wrong. I think one of the worst is probably drummer boy too, because you're literally a child soldier and you don't have a weapon
unless they sharpen the end of their drumstick.
So I get to.
If there's any drummer boys listening, give us feedback.
I don't know if the U.S. Army goes back to all this coin and modern warfare didn't really pan out for us, so we're gonna go back to von Steuben's Blue Book, and we're gonna start recruiting drummer boys again, 13, because a lot of them are 13, 14, 15 years old.
That would fucking suck so bad.
Oh man, so what's my weapon? Oh, your weapon is those sick beats.
Yeah.
Just drumming and playing, I don't know.
And imagine sucking. Then you got two sides hating you.
You're a shitty drummer boy, so they just throw you out in the middle.
Yeah.
Well, Nick, thank you for stopping by and hearing about how awful your life would be if you happen to be a submariner in World War II.
Yeah, it sounds like bullshit.
Until next time, everyone, don't serve in a German U-boat during World War II. You know what? Don't flush your toilet.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Don't flush your toilet without proper professional.
Hold your shit.
Hold your shit until the next episode. See you next time. Later.